שאלתי מאת אדוני, אחת שאלתי אותה אבקש, אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אחת שאלתי אותה אבקש, שבתי שבתי בבית אדוני, שבתי שבתי כל ימי חיי, שבתי 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 בבית אדוני, שבתי שבתי כל ימי חיי, לחזור בנועם אדוני ולבקר בהיכלו, לחזות בנועם אדוני, to gaze upon the beauty of Adonai. One thing I ask you, Adonai, to be with me all of my life. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אחת שאלתי אותה אבקש.
Shavua Tov, everyone. It's the greeting we say after Shabbat has ended, and we'll be making Havdalah soon enough to welcome in the new week. But we say, may it be a good week. And you know, as we were preparing for tonight, I was thinking about how 5 months ago we prepared for Passover. And rabbinically, it was a struggle to prepare for our festival of freedom while we were not feeling so free. And while so many of our people were hostages in Gaza. And one of my colleagues called and said, you know, we're going to have to do this again for the Yamim Noraim, for the High Holy Days as well. And I said, of course the hostages would be freed by then. But that I appreciate that we would still be struggling with this year when the fall holidays come around. At that time, I could not imagine that our people would still be imprisoned in Gaza. And I did not want to imagine that as we enter the holiday season, we would still be living in a time of such uncertainty and pain, with such a dearth of answers. Yet here we are. I've been giving a lot of thought to these holy days, as you might imagine. We're entering a difficult season. There are sections of our liturgy that are really difficult to deal with now, whether we're talking about Unatana Tokef, the infamous who shall live and who shall die, who by fire and who by water, or the idea of Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. Our Torah and Haftorah readings for the holy days focus on familial loss, whether actual or threatened, and this year they hit our ears differently. Abraham almost sacrifices one son and sends away another. Hagar thinks she is seeing her son die before her. Hannah needs to give her longed-for son away to live with Eli the priest. Jeremiah speaks of Rachel crying out over the loss of her sons, all Israel. This year, these sections cause us to focus more deeply on the tremendous loss that our people have suffered, and just the number of people who have suffered loss, who have feared for their lives and the lives of their family members, and like Rachel, who have just cried over deep suffering. And at the same time, I've been thinking about Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, which pushes us to see that there's a time for everything, including a time to grieve and a time to celebrate. This year it has been harder and sometimes impossible to find the balance that Kohelet encourages and prescribes. Perhaps seeking balance right now is just too much to ask of us. We need to allow ourselves to feel the loss of equilibrium and to struggle. But nevertheless, I really want to look for hope. And I want to remind myself that hopefully others want to look for hope. And that despite the horror and despite the pain, despite the struggle, Am Yisrael Chai. And it is in the spirit of hope and possibility that I share these poetic words by Alden Salvi as a way by which we might enter these holy days tonight in this service of Selichot, of forgiveness and possibility for new beginnings. Let us dream wildly unimaginable blessings, blessings so unexpected, blessings so beyond our hopes for this world, blessings so unbelievable in this era that their very existence uplifts our vision of creation, our relationships to each other, and our yearning for life itself. Let us dream wildly unimaginable blessings, a complete healing of mind and body and spirit, a complete healing for all, the end of suffering and strife, the end of plague and disease, when kindness flows from the river of love, when goodness flows from the river of grace. Awakened in the spirit of all beings, when God's light radiating holiness is seen by everyone. Let us pray with all of our hearts for wildly unimaginable blessings so that God will hear the call to open the gates of the garden, seeing that we haven't waited, that we've already begun to repair the world, each of us becoming a blessing in testimony to our faith in life, our faith in each other, and our faith in the Holy One, the source of all blessings. It is with that hope, that wildly unimaginable pot of blessings, that we make Havdalah together. We take the sweetness from Shabbat and we carry it with us into the week ahead. I'll invite everyone to please rise and remind you that we begin the bookending of the holy days. Right, the next time we make Havdalah together, we will stand and we will come forward on this bima, and we will all gather with our arms around each other, and we will wish each other not just a good week, but a good year.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim borei minei besamim Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh Laila la 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 laila laila la 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 laila Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam המבדיל בין קודש לחול המבדיל בין קודש לחול אליהו הנביא אליהו התשבי אליהו הגלעדי במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו עם משיח בן דוד עם משיח בן דוד אליהו הנביא אליהו התשבי אליהו הגלעדי
So tonight, for the remainder of our time together, we'll begin with a reading, and then Cantor Josh is going to take us through several pieces that are meant to move us spiritually into the space of the holy days, of letting this really be an on-ramp, an entryway for us. And then we'll have what I hope will be a wonderful conversation with our guest tonight on the topic of forgiveness. And then, as we do every year, we'll change our Torah covers, and then we'll have some sweets together. So that is our plan for the evening for the next 45 or so minutes. And I'll invite you to please read with me. The holy season now begins. In these days, during the Hebrew month of Elul, we begin the process of Teshuvah. The days of awe are fast approaching, time to consider where we went wrong, times when we gave up on our ideals and gave into our impulses. We held grudges and refused to forgive. We ignored and idolized. We insisted that we were right. We judged others rashly and wrongly. We were jealous and unjust. We were lazy and we lied. We missed the mark and minimized our mistakes. We mocked what we did not understand. We neglected those who depend on us. We were negative and narcissistic. We overreached and overreacted, too often erupting in anger. We poisoned and polluted. We perverted truth for personal gain. We quelled the voice of conscience within us. We quit too soon and quarreled too often. We ridiculed and resented. We refused to accept help. We rationalized our failings and our flaws. We spurned the wisdom of our tradition. We squabbled and scorned. We were vain and vicious. We vilified foreigners and strangers. We wasted time, strength, and talent. We wallowed in self-pity, wished but did not act. We coerced the weak to do our will. We drove away those we love with silence. We deceived and denied. We enticed and enslaved. We exalted money and material goods. We fouled air, sea, and land. We flattered and falsified. We gravitated to those who gossip. For all these sins and more, we return to you.
Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Return again, return again, return to the land of our souls. Return again, return again, return to the land of our souls. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are, born and reborn again. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, Noser Chesed la'alafim, Nose Avon v'Fesha v'Chata v'Nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקה.
According to the rabbis, the possibility of forgiveness is woven into the very fabric of creation. The description of the first day of creation concludes, Vayhi erev, vayhi voker, yom echad. And there was evening, and there was morning, day one. Now, notice it doesn't say, first day, yom rishon. So what does Yom Echad refer to? It says Yom Echad, one day, not first day. And the rabbis say it actually refers to Yom Kippur. In other words, even before there was the creation of human beings, the possibility of forgiveness was given to the world. That is because God knew that none of us would be perfect. Every one of us would have a bad day. And God believed that to give humans a full life of guilt and burden with no mechanism for repentance would be truly tragic. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes in his introduction to the Machzor, forgiveness is a divine gift. Forgiveness is one of the most radical ideas ever to have been introduced into the moral imagination of humankind. It breaks the cycle of stimulus-response, harm and retaliation, wrong and revenge. It frees individuals from the burden of their past and humanity from the irreversibility of history. It tells us that enemies can become friends.
This piece, Shema Kolenu, to me, is the High Holidays encapsulated. And growing up, I was used to hearing an organ in synagogue, and some people are used to that, and some people aren't. But I just want to warn you, you're going to hear some organ, and I hope that it helps get you in the mood for the High Holiday season. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Chus v'rachem Aleinu Aleinu V'kabel berachamim, berachamim uveratzon et tefilateinu. Hashiveinu Adonai elecha Hashiveinu elecha v'nashuva Chadesh yameinu yameinu kekedem. Tashlicheinu Tashlicheinu Le'etzikna Ki תעזבנו. Adonai Eloheinu, chus verachem aleinu, aleinu, vekabel berachamim, berachamim uverachon et tefilateinu.
We continue with our confessional prayer of Ashamnu. Please join us.
Hi, 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 Ashamnu,
Ashamnu,
Bagadnu,
Bagadnu,
Gazalnu,
Gazalnu,
Dibarnu Dofi,
Dibarnu Dofi.
hi, 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 Ha'avinu,
Ha'avinu,
V'hirshanu,
Vahirshanu,
Zadnu,
Zadnu,
Chamasnu,
Hamasnu,
Tafalnu Sheker,
Tafalnu Shaker.
ay, 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 Ya'atznu-ra,
Ya'atznu-ra,
Kizavnu,
Kizavnu,
Latznu,
Latznu,
Maradnu,
Maradnu,
Ni'atznu,
Niatznu,
Sararnu,
Sararnu,
Avinu,
Avinu.
ay, 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 Pashanu,
Pashanu,
Sararnu,
Sararnu,
Kishinu Oref,
Kishinu Oref.
ay, 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 Rashanu,
Rashanu,
Shichatnu,
Shichatnu,
Titavnu,
Titavnu,
Tainu,
Tainu,
Titanu,
Titan.
ay, 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 ay.
Please sing with us.
ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחלנו, כפר לנו. ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, selichot, selach lanu, mechal lanu, selach lanu, mechal lanu, kapir lanu.
Okay, folks, we got a special treat for you this evening. I'm going to introduce Dr. Lee Camp to you. I've got a lot of official stuff I'm going to skip. This is what I'm going to tell you, the important stuff. He's Alabamian by birth. I don't know if he cares what's happening in the football game right now, but he's was raised in the tail end of the Appalachians. And I mention that because he doesn't know this, and you don't know this, but when I was a senior in college, I wrote my senior thesis on the Appalachian region of the United States, black lung legislation. We could get into it another time. He got his undergraduate degree in computer science at Lipscomb University, where he fell in love with a wonderful woman named Laura, who became his wife. Again, I can relate. He went to seminary at Abilene Christian University, a 6-month sojourn in Kenya working with street kids, South Bend, Indiana, where he did graduate studies at Notre Dame in moral theology and Christian ethics. He got his PhD there. Teaching full-time at Lipscomb University since 1999. I was his student. He and Laura have 3 sons whom they love, of course. He likes flying sailplanes. That's one of his hobbies. It makes him giddy. I am going to tell you a little bit about his podcast in a moment, but I wanted to tell the story really about what brought him here today. Some of you have heard it already. We take very seriously these concepts of justice and of mercy, compassion, and of humility. They're in our tagline here at Congregation Micah. Did everyone meet Micah, who's playing the organ over there? Thank you, Micah. Yeah. So I was inspired by his work because he was the professor, one of, that took a group of ministers all throughout the South to places in Mississippi and Alabama. Before the Equal Justice Initiative had its beautiful memorial and museum, he took us there to see the work that they were doing. And it inspired us. When I say us, the wonderful Julie Greenberg, who runs our school, created a whole journey for justice, if you recall. And some of you went on that journey here locally. So he takes justice seriously. Let me tell you about compassion. I was in rare form. It happens. Everybody, I read about it, loses their temper sometimes, and saw that Lee Camp had posted something about Israel being a genocidal nation. And I tried to be cool, but I sent a pretty pointed email to my former professor, and he's like, it's a different Lee Camp. So I had to, as gracefully as I could, and he was graceful in accepting the apology, apologized profusely, and he quickly came and had coffee with me, showing his compassion and modeling it. The list is very long. What really you need to know about his humility is he is an authentic person. He is a wonderful teacher, and really just has a terrific spirit, and he's going to share a little bit of that spirit with us tonight. I wanted to point out, he does do this podcast called No Small Endeavor. If you haven't listened to it, and some of us are addicted to it, you should check it out. He does a live performance, and that's going to take place Thanksgiving weekend, November 24th, or the one before, and it's going to take place at the Schermerhorn Symphony Center. So I encourage you, if you like him, to check it out. It's going to be fabulous. I'm going to turn it over to this wonderful rabbi here, and I'm going to invite Dr. Lee Camp forward.
So, shall I refer to you as Dr. Camp?
Please, Lee. Please.
Okay, Lee. And then, okay, great. I've been emailing with Lee for a while now, but he actually only started receiving my emails, I think, yesterday, because I think I was emailing, was that the other Lee Camp that I was
emailing the other Lee Camp.
Oh my gosh, we cannot stop terrorizing this poor man, although he doesn't sound very great, so I don't know. Okay. I emailed him a lot. Well, I feel like, is this fun? Because usually you're the interviewer.
Yeah, I feel a little out of place here.
Okay.
Being on this side of the interview microphone.
I love it. I hope we have a lot of No Small Endeavor converts here this evening, but this is a treat for me, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about your religious background? I know Rabbi Flip gave us, a few pieces, but how has religion been influential or important in your life?
I was raised in the... If an American sociologist of religion were writing the story, it would be that I was raised in a extremely fundamentalist Alabama church. And it was, it had all the beauty and the destructiveness of that kind of tradition. I mean, it was beautiful in the sense that we had a community that really cared for one another. And it was a small intergenerational church where young and old all looked out for each other and cared for each other and loved on each other. And really took the scriptures seriously, taught us a lot about taking our faith very seriously. And then on the not so helpful side, it was a highly legalistic, shame-based, self-righteousness, self-justification kind of context in which it kind of put a lot of stuff into my psyche that took me decades really to work through. And I really began to kind of work through a lot of the stuff intellectually, even as an undergraduate. When I came to Nashville to go to college, I did a lot of biblical studies and a lot of studying Greek and theology. And so that gave me an opportunity to kind of begin to examine a lot of the things that I had been taught intellectually. And I kind of began seeing pretty quickly, wait a second, I don't think this stuff holds up the way I presumed it did when I was 13, 14, 15. And then going on to seminary and PhD work allowed me to continue to kind of work on the intellectual piece. But it was really more the emotional piece of it that took kind of decades to kind of work through. And so even as 10 years ago, in my late 40s, I'm doing a lot of therapy work. And I was doing this, some of you may be familiar with it, a kind of, the first time I heard of it, I thought, that sounds like voodoo. I don't want anything to do with it. But at the time, I was in so much pain with a kind of a midlife crisis and depression, I thought, I'll try anything. And so this therapist said, why don't you try this EMDR? And as I started doing the EMDR, she knew I was dealing with kind of a deep sense of shame. And so the day we did the EMDR, it was a really long session. And so she put me in this one recent thing that had happened to me where I had felt a lot of acute shame. And then we just kind of went back through my life, my 40s, my 30s, my 20s. And by the time I got to my early teens and age 12, so many of those episodes had happened in a church context. And when I got to the 13, 12, I just was sobbing and cursing. And I finally took the paddles that I had in my hand and just kind of threw them across the room, cursing. And, and it hit me that there were adults in that context who either couldn't or wouldn't do better for the young, for us young kids who loved the Lord. And they kind of taught us a certain way of thinking about what our faith meant that was pretty damaging. So like most of our traditions, it was beautiful, and it was painful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You used the word legalistic, which made me think, Judaism is a fairly legalistic tradition as well. And I was just reading something the other day. Someone, I can't remember who the writer was, but they were saying, it's often used as a negative descriptor to say, oh, Judaism's so nitpicky, it's so legalistic. And then she gave the example of sort of a legalistic text, which basically says, it's from the Talmud, that if you walk into a shop, a store, and you have no ability or intention of purchasing something, you are not permitted to ask what something costs, because you might spark the hope in the salesperson or the owner that there would be a sale, and that's shameful to do so when there's never going to be one. And she brings it back around to say that, yes, Judaism's nitpicky and legalistic, but when it's for the sake of teaching kindness and compassion and goodness and that sort of thing, that's what it's meant for. And I say all that because I think for so many religions where that legalistic piece is there, that is the true intention, I believe. I think the hermeneutic is, that it's, if the way in which we understand and apply religion, whatever it might be, Christianity, Judaism, and it diminishes or demeans the dignity or soul of another, then we are misinterpreting it,
Yeah.
or misapplying it.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. The way I think about a destructive legalism is it doesn't have an end in mind. That it reduces the ethical norm simply to a rule without consideration of ends and without the kind of people that we're coming to be. That reminds me of an important story in my life that relates to me processing some of that stuff. I was in a group where we were one day grumbling, processing, thinking about some of our traditions, and I was telling, to kind of give you a glimpse of kind of some of the legalisms that were pretty unhelpful to me. There was some Southern Protestants are very high, strict taboos around dancing. And in my context, it was not only you don't dance, it was that you don't wear shorts in public, and even one of these bizarre episodes that I had with this preacher when I was probably 12 or 13 is we were on a church youth group, and we saw this guy coming down the sidewalk in his jogging shorts. And it's a van full of teenagers, impressionable teenagers, and the preacher looks at him and he says, "He looks real nice in those shorts. He'll look real nice in hell." And so that was the kind of stuff that I was being fed,
And they weren't even jean shorts.
No.
It was like...
And but when I was in 7th grade, as I recollect the story, and who knows if our adolescent memories are very accurate, but as I remember, in 7th grade, I was in PE class, and I got the word that we were going to do square dancing 1 6 weeks period in PE, and I knew this was a problem for my church, and so we discussed it in the church youth group, and the church decided, the preacher with the youth group decided that the way I could bear witness to the gospel was by sitting in the stands and not doing square dancing that 6 weeks. And so later in my life with this group, we were talking about that, and I was grumbling about how stupid that was, and afterwards, this man I had gotten to know, a Jewish man that I had learned so much from, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, "You know that story you were telling?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Of course that was silly. That stuff that they taught you was silly." He said, "But I think they gave you a gift." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I've listened to you talk about your work and how sometimes the kind of work that you do cuts against the grain, and you've gotten criticized and sometimes marginalized." And he said, "How many 7th graders get taught to be able to sit aside and do something different from what everybody else is doing?" And he said, "That was a gift to you." And it radically transformed the way I framed my interpretation of that experience. So I had experienced the legalism, and what he did was he framed it like you're saying. He framed it towards what kind of character it gave me. That was a very beautiful gift he gave me.
I love that. That's, by the way, what's so beautiful about his podcast, but you'll have to listen. I was going to make a joke about how useful square dancing is in our adult lives, and that we all had to learn it. And also, I was thinking of, Footloose. Footloose came into mind about David leaping and dancing before the Lord. I feel like we need to talk about all the scriptural. Yeah, okay.
One of these days, I have an essay I want to write about dance and the love of God, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. Well. I want to ask, since forgiveness is meant to be our topic this evening, and it's really the meat of this service, is there a personal story beyond the one that Flip shared? Thank you for forgiving my husband for his lovely email to you. A personal story of forgiveness that you might feel comfortable sharing with us.
I had been wondering, since I got your questions a few days ago, what I would share, and it turns out that the most proximate instance of profound forgiveness, both in giving and receiving, just happened to me this morning. And it was a long and coming conversation with my brother. and there were some things between us, and he had asked to come to the house and talk. And one of the things that struck me about that was that one of the things that he shared was something that we had discussed. There was a painful episode that happened about 10 years ago. And we had discussed it before, and I had expressed forgiveness previously, and we had talked about it, but there had been one element of that he had not been able to tell me about it, that he told me this morning, and it was like another layer, and it was like, oh, ow, okay. And so I was grateful that he shared that with me, and I told him, and he referred to it as something like a horrifying, recurring thought that comes to him. And I said, as far as I'm concerned, that's not coming from me, and you can let that go. But I had been remembering ways I didn't show up for him at a very painful time in his life, and I just failed. And there were reasons I failed, and there were mitigating circumstances that contributed to my failure, but I failed. And he gave me, by taking that initiative, he gave me the opportunity to tell him that I had failed him and to apologize to him. And it was just a good reminder to me that I think so much of my growing into an adult has been not to be afraid of feelings and strong emotions, and to know that sometimes those things just take literally sometimes decades to resolve. And for me to kind of keep leaning in. I was so conflict averse when I was young that I would much rather kind of find a quick, easy, supposed fix, rather than sitting with the discomfort or the hardship and keep leaning in over a long time. And so this was another kind of gifted moment of reminding me sometimes these things take leaning in and leaning in and leaning in again and again over a long period of time in the same direction. And then some sweet moments can come that we don't anticipate.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because we have the season of forgiveness, and you sometimes don't get to everything that you think you can get to, and it takes years sometimes, multiple seasons of forgiveness, I think, of coming back to something. Thank you for sharing that. In Judaism, we make a distinction between the forgiveness between ourselves and our fellow humankind, and forgiveness between ourselves and God. And I was wondering if you make a distinction personally between the two, or if your religious tradition or your background does the same. How do you think of it?
Yeah, I'll just speak to that personally. I think given the sort of shame-based, capricious legalisms in which I was raised, at that point there were certain, our tradition taught us certain things that had to take place, to be forgiven. And you best do them in this precise way, in this precise time, and otherwise your eternal destination was in danger. And as I have moved away from such transactional understandings of God, and there's been theological things that certainly have developed in that regard, but just personally, there's been a kind of move away from a transactional understanding of my relationship with God and love of God to a much more relational engagement with God. And so consequently, I think I experience asking forgiveness and receiving forgiveness with God in a way that's very similar to the giving or in this case, my receiving of forgiveness or asking for forgiveness with relationships. So it used to be quite different, and now increasingly it's grown to be phenomenologically similar, I guess I would say.
It's interesting because if I'm understanding you correctly, sometimes people feel like it's much more difficult to do that between themselves and another human, and easier to do it between themselves and God, which is which is a very private, interaction. But it almost feels like it was the opposite. Harder to do it with God, given your experience growing up in the tradition that you did. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and I think another element in that for me, I'll say two quick things about this. Theologically, one of the things that happened was that in our tradition, though our denomination, we were not Calvinists and we're not part of the Reformed tradition, but we had still inherited a lot of particulars from the Reformed Calvinist tradition, and so you may or may not be familiar with the notion that one way, a predominant way of interpreting the death of Jesus on the cross is what's called penal substitutionary atonement. And so the idea there was that, going back to John Calvin in the 16th century, Calvin saw the death of Christ as this sort of, that we sinned against God and therefore we deserve to die, and Jesus dies in our place. So penal, the penalty, substitutionary atonement. And that's actually, even though a lot of people call that conservative Christianity, it's actually a very recent development in the history of theological Christian tradition. And there are a lot more interesting, I think, compelling ways to understand the metaphors around that story that we claim to be central to our faith. And so once one, I think, steps out of that sort of way of construing what's going on in our relationship with God, for me, it opened up this sort of friendship with God. And I'm not a charismatic, mystical kind of person, for good or for ill. That said, though, I am grateful to have a sort of daily awareness of friendship with God. And so when I'm aware of my failings, there's a sort of sadness and communion in that. And then the second thing I was going to say about that is that I think the other thing for me that helped me learn better to ask for forgiveness was simply growing up and thinking, I'm really not all that special, and I screw up like everybody else does, and not to have to defend myself as much as I once thought I had to, and just to realize, we're all human and we all mess up. I love that, what the interpretation, commentary from the rabbis about the creation of the first day. That's beautiful. Yeah. I'd never heard that before. But that we assume in the matrix and the beauty of the creation that of course we're going to screw up, right? Yeah. And then in the creation itself are these sorts of beautiful practices of forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah. I want to be cognizant of our time. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, which is it ever okay not to forgive? And when for you are those moments? I get asked that all the time.
Yeah.
This relationship has gone sour. This person did something that I can't ever forgive them for. Is it okay to not forgive? I often think of it as and we've talked about this recently in our women's group, but, forgiveness is essentially something you do for yourself, that you can grant grace or trust to another person, but forgiveness is letting yourself move on from holding that anger or that pain or that destructive toxin inside of you because you just can't stop thinking about how angry or agitated you are. But there is an element of, in Judaism, if somebody comes and asks for our forgiveness 3 times and we continue to withhold it, after the 3rd time, we become in effect, the sinner. So if you think of forgiveness as something that we are in fact granting to somebody else, this sort of notion of I hear your apology and I accept it Doesn't mean you have to trust that person again. Doesn't mean you have to resume that kind of relationship you had before. I mean, do you think there's ever a time where you don't have to do that?
My seeking to take Jesus seriously, Apostle Peter, Lord, how many times? You expect this, 7 times? And the gospel account says that Jesus replies, I tell you 77 times, or 70 times 7, depending on how you translate it. And in the the Lord's Prayer in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, there's this forgive us as we forgive our debtors, or forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And then that's the only part of the prayer that there's a commentary about at the close of the prayer, that if you do not forgive others, then neither will your Father forgive you. Which I don't see that necessarily as a quid pro quo as much as it is, I think, a sort of, if I refuse to participate in the ways of grace, I'm thereby excluding myself from the ways of grace, is the way I understand that.
So that's there's no exceptions.
I think that's the calling.
The goal.
The goal.
Yeah.
Now that being said, then there's real life, right?
Right.
And I think that there's, similar to something that the way you were describing some of your tradition, the way some people will put it in Christianity, there's a distinction to be made between forgiveness and reconciliation, right? So the forgiveness is to say, as one theologian puts it in his book, Embodying Forgiveness, that I find a very helpful book. He says that forgiveness is a sort of posture of being open to the possibility of relationship, whereas reconciliation is a restoration of the relationship.
Oh, I like that. It's like a stair-stepping process.
Yeah. And so
nice.
That forgiveness, it is a sort of posture of saying, I can be open to something here. Mm-hmm. But it also simultaneously lets me let go of my resentment, right? But knowing that even if I do forgive,
it's not necessarily
that's not the
restoration.
end. That's not the end of the story, or it may be the end, because
Yeah.
it may be that there's such an offense that there can't be reconciliation.
Yeah.
But there can be a dropping of the tension that's within me, or that's within the relationship that holds both of us in a chain.
There are 3 transgressions in Judaism for which the rabbis say God does not grant forgiveness. One is murder, the other is idolatry, and the third is, say again? Inappropriate sexual behavior. And I always find that so interesting, because it, to me, runs counter to how I think we talk about God in every other way. Why are those the 3? In other words, why are those the 3 imperfections? If we're created in God's image and we are imperfect and we make mistakes, as we've acknowledged that we do, really, you can't come back from, there's not, and forgiveness, the possibility is not there in every, so to me that's an indication that we have misunderstood, or it's not literally the Word of God, the text, because I know we're going down a rabbit hole of another kind, but that it's to me that seems like a human interpretation that at a certain time made sense, but doesn't really make sense anymore.
Can I tell you something that I love about Judaism from an outside
Please.
perspective?
We all love Judaism, so
Yeah.
we'd love to know what you do.
I envy this about your tradition, and that is, you just said, well, our tradition is that there are these 3 that you can't get forgiveness for, and then you say, but I find that a problem. And it's like, we Christians, especially conservative Christians, could learn so much from this, because it's like, you read a text, and it's the arguing about the text
Yeah.
that is the act of a communal faithfulness.
Yes.
Whereas we read a text and think you've got to get the blasted right interpretation,
Yeah.
and then everybody else doesn't have a chance, right?
Yeah.
But I think you have something there that we could learn a whole lot from.
Well, I had about 5 other questions that I'm not going to ask you now, but I hope you'll stay and visit with us after the service.
Yeah.
And,
And I would just like to say I really appreciate the invitation and grateful for you all inviting
well, we
me.
hope we can have you back again.
Delightful to be here with
You're
you
a
all.
treasure.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Okay, friends, I'm going to ask Rabbi Flip to help out with this since I'm holding a microphone. But we are going to change our Torah covers. And so because we are going to be taking our Torahs out of the ark, I'm going to invite everyone to stand. Now, here's how this works. Some of you are veterans at this, but we are going to have you come forward. We're going to take our Torahs out of the ark. Probably need at least 2 people per Torah. Some of you want to just come forward and watch. You're welcome to. And then we're going to gingerly change the covers. So we're going to invite you to come forward at this time and come take a Torah.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Adon ha-selichot bochen levavot gole amnukot dovet tzedakot chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu hadur baniflaot vatik benechamot zocher berit avot choker kelayot chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu tov umitiv laberiot yodea kol nistarot kovesh onot lovesh tzedakot chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu malhe zechuyot norat tehilot soleach honot ona beitzarot chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu poel yeshuot sofe atidot kore hadorot rochev harvot tzatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu chatanu lefanecha rachim aleinu. לפניך רחם עלינו הדור בנפלאות ותיק בנחמות זוכר ברית אבות חוקר כליות חתנו לפניך רחם עלינו חתנו לפניך רחם עלינו טוב ומיטיב לבריות יודע כל
Folks, if you want to come up onto the Bina for Ovinu Malkeinu, please feel free to.
עוונות לא ויש צדקות. אבינו מלכנו חוננו בנינו אבינו מלכנו חוננו בנינו כי אין בנו מעשים עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו אבינו מלכנו חוננו בנינו אבינו מלכנו חוננו בנינו כי אין בנו מעשים.
Please be seated. The image of, I would say the image par excellence of the Holy Days is the Sefer HaChaim, the Book of Life, because it is our hope that we will merit our names to be inscribed for another year. And of course, we don't know what the magic ticket is, the magic lottery number that gets us in. But I think Cantor Josh and Rabbi Flip would agree with me. Coming tonight definitely gives you a leg up.
It's a good start.
So you are on the right path. We'll conclude tonight with Sefer HaChaim, the Book of Life, and then we'll hear the shofar sounded.
בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה ונכתב לפניך ניזכר ונכתב עולמך בית ישראל ואנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים טובים ולשלום לחיים טובים ולשלום.
Please rise one final time. We'll hear the shofar sounded, and then we hope you'll join us out in the foyer for a dessert reception.
Tekiah.
Shavua Tov,
Shavua
everyone.
Tov.